The Mystery of the Cupboard by Lynne Reid Banks. Chapter 8. The Old Bottle. At tea time one of the Thatchers came to the window, gesturing. He had something in his hand. It looked like a dirty glass jar. "Look, Lionel! They've found the bottle!" exclaimed Omri's mother excitedly. Everyone hurried out into the sunny reed-strewn garden. The whole team was there, grinning broadly. The old bottle didn't look particularly old. It was a half-gallon cider jar with a wide neck closed by a screw top, and there was something in it down in the middle. The head thatcher opened it and fished this out. It was a stiff brown roll of paper, or something like paper. "Parchment," said Omri's father reverently. They carefully unrolled it on the garden table. There were a number of smaller pieces of ordinary paper rolled up inside it. The parents went quite crazy over these. They were mainly lists of names, and the only halfway interesting thing for Omri at first was a few scrawled comments at various dates, as June 12th, had to stop work till more thatch came, and September 20th, thunderstorm, blew the half we done away, tarpaulin and all, right across the field. Mr. S. beside himself, though. It weren't our fault. And Bob T. fell off roof tree, luckily on pile of reeds, so only cracked his leg. One of the men read this aloud, and they all roared with laughter. Seemingly Bob must have had too much cider with his lunch. Then Omri's mother picked up one of the newer pieces of paper. "Oh, here's one from the last batching back in 1950. And suddenly Omri was interested. "Let me see that, Mum," he cried, almost snatching it out of her hands. There was the list of names and a few comments that made Omri's heart beat faster. "Mrs. D. Driscoll," thought Omri. "That's her. Still gives us our tea, though he tries to stop her troubling herself when she should keep to her bed. Doctor come, Mrs. T. weaker." And at the bottom, one last comment that chilled Omri's heart. "We did our last trim very quiet. Finished October 10, 1950. She won't see the job, poor lady." "Omri," said his mother, who was reading over his shoulder. "Could Mrs. T. have been Jessica Charlotte?" Omri opened his mouth to say, "Of course it was," but he mustn't give away that he knew anything, so he said, "Maybe, Mum. She did die that year. You know, I've been thinking about it all since you came up with your idea about Jessica Charlotte living in this house. It's all coming back. I was about 9, and Granny Marie got a letter telling her sister had died. She was very upset about it. She was here in England. She kept saying, 'So near all this time.' She'd always thought she was abroad. I remember her crying, which she never did usually, and me trying to make her feel better, and her saying, 'Here all the time, and never a word or a sign, and now it's too late.' Then she put on what she called her blacks, her funeral clothes, marched me down into the next-door neighbor's, and was gone for 2 days." She broke off, frowning. "Then something else happened. Just after she got back, the postman brought a big package. I remember her getting it. She tore the paper off of it. It was a box of some kind, but she wasn't interested in that. There was a note in it, and when she read it, she just broke down. It was awful. She wouldn't show it to me. I remember her sobbing and crumpling it up, and after that, for days and days, she just kept bursting into tears. 'Oh, how could she? How could she be so wicked?' she kept saying. 'My own sister to be the cause of it all.' And I kept on at her to tell me what her wicked sister had done, but she never would. And after that she refused to speak about her, so I always thought about her as my wicked great-aunt Jessica Charlotte." Omri said nothing. He couldn't. He was thinking, she was wicked then, really wicked, but he didn't want to think that. The notebook had said to him, "Don't judge." He didn't know everything yet. He kept his mouth shut and picked up another bit of paper from the bottle without seeing it. The older bits of paper that were fascinating Omri's father didn't seem to mean much to the Thatchers. They were milling over the latest bit. One of them pointed and said quite excitedly, "Here, look, here be old Jack Hobbs. He didn't retire till a year or two back. Still plays a good game of skittles, does Jack. And here's Tom Towler's signature. He's still going strong. Saw him in the Red Lion last week." "I wouldn't say strong," said another. "Not up here, he ain't." And he pointed to his own head. The others gave a sympathetic chuckle. Omri could hardly believe his ears. "Do you mean some of the men who thatched the roof last time, who signed the bottle paper, are still around?" "Why not? 'Tweren't much more than 30 year ago. Tom ain't above 60, if he's that much." "It's extraordinary," said his mother suddenly. "They might have known my great-aunt. Don't you think it's thrilling, Omri?" Omri frowned and said nothing. He was thinking. "Well, I don't know what you're all rabbiting on about," grumbled Guillaume, heading back into the house. "Ask me, it's a dead bore, and I do mean dead." After the others had gone off, Omri sought out the chief thatcher. He was halfway up one of the long ladders. The new thatch had come, huge piles of it, beautiful, golden, and straight in bundles, and the real thatching work was beginning. "Could you take me to meet those men, Tom Towsler and Jack Hobbs?" The thatcher paused and looked down at Omri. "Well, I don't know. Jack's on holiday. I suppose you could try the Red Lion. That's Tom's local. They got a garden kids is allowed in. If he was there, of a Sunday like, you could have a word maybe. He's a bit queer in the head, though, is Tom. You mustn't take all he says, but with a pinch of salt, like." On Friday, school finished for half-term. That was 9 blissful days of freedom. No homework need be worried about until the night before school restarted. As soon as he got home, Omri snatched a scone, raced to his room, blocked the doors, and opened the notebook. Patrick was coming tomorrow, and he was to meet Tom Towsler the next day. It was more important than ever now that he should read to the end of the story, but he was still only halfway through the notebook. The writing was getting more difficult to read. He supposed Jessica Charlotte was getting weaker and iller. "I went home on the omnibus, as if nothing had happened. The aquamarine earrings were in my pocket, and I kept putting my hand in to feel them. I had done it. I had taken my revenge, and I could never be caught, never. Maria had left the room for under 2 minutes, and the desk where the key was kept was downstairs. She couldn't suspect me. I had got clean away with it. I remember feeling madly excited and wanting to tell everyone on the omnibus how clever I'd been. This feeling of elation lasted for 1 week, but it was mixed with another feeling, very disturbing. I remember that week as one might remember a week of drunkenness or madness, when one is not in a normal state of mind, when in fact the mind is not working properly. Later its function returns. One returns to oneself and looks back in wonder and horror, thinking, was that I? Was that creature reveling in her vile deed, that conscienceless monster? Was that myself? And all the time I felt that part of my mind that contains my gift pulling, dragging at me, urging me to listen to it, to switch it on and listen. The strange thing was that throughout the entire week, waking and sleeping, the word lead kept coming into my mind. Lead. Pour the lead, Jessica Charlotte. I had a great urge, an urge I'd never had, to cast my own future in the lead. It was my gift, warning me. If I had heeded, could I have changed anything? That is what tortures me. But I rejected the call. I would not hear it. Exactly 1 week after I had stolen the earrings, I left my basement rooms to walk through the streets to the shops. I remember every detail of that day, the weather, my clothes, the look of my hand in its old kid glove, as I handed over a penny for the evening's newspaper. I remember the newsboy's face. I glanced at the front page, and there was Matthew photographed on his wedding day in a top hat and a morning dress, with Maria, her radiant bride, on his arm, and before I could brace myself I had read the words under it, the words that burst that evil bubble of elation and shattered my peace forever. Ex-colonel dies under wheels of cab. Half paralyzed with horror I read on, but what was written in the paper was obviously only part of the story. Why should Lottie have run into the street, making Matthew run after her, straight under a taxicab? It made no sense. I couldn't take it in. It's a mistake, I kept thinking. Matthew dead, it was unthinkable. I ran in blind panic to a telephone. Maria's maid, Millie, answered. She said what she always said. "Mr. Darren's residence," and then burst into tears. Millie, it's Mrs. Darren's sister. Tell me what happened. Please tell me at once." "Oh, Miss Driscoll, it's too dreadful. I can't tell you." "Do as you're told, girl," I shouted at her down the line. My sudden anger made her control yourself. She lowered her voice, still shaken with sobs. "It was them earrings, miss. The bluey-green ones Mrs. Darren set such store by. They was lost, miss. She couldn't find them, and it seems no one could have taken them except Miss Lottie." Something seemed to burst in my head. I nearly fainted where I stood. Lottie! Lottie take the earrings! What madness was this? My Lottie! "Mrs. Darren let her play with her jewels sometimes for a special treat. She said Miss Lottie was the only one who knew the secret of the hiding place where she kept the key. She called the child into her room. I was in the room next door. I couldn't help but hear. Miss, really I couldn't. She questioned her, and poor Miss Lottie kept crying and saying she never took them, and Mrs. Darren said she wouldn't be angry if she'd own up, but she wouldn't, and all of a sudden she ran straight out the room, then down the stairs. Mr. Darren was just coming in through the front door, and Miss Lottie, she was crying something awful, miss, crying and shouting, I didn't, hysterical like, and she run right straight out through the front door, under her father's arm, down the steps and into the street. And her father ran after her, calling her to come back, and then there was a kind of screech in the road, and as the cab tried to stop, and a thump, and then it was all over." I hadn't breathed, but now I did. In gasps I cried out, "And did she come back, Miss Lottie? Is she safe at least?" "Yes, miss. Miss Lottie is safe and sound, but the mistress is near to going out of her mind. The doctor's given her something to make her sleep, but God knows what will happen to us all when she wakes up." Omri stopped reading and looked out over the garden. The view was peaceful and beautiful. 10 days of holiday lay ahead. Patrick was coming, but Omri saw and thought none of it. He was inside Jessica Charlotte's head, feeling what she must have felt when she learned that by stealing the earrings she had killed Matthew. That was how she would look at it, and through suspicion falling on Lottie, the person she loved best. It was too awful. He couldn't bear to think of how she must have felt. He tried to read on, but he couldn't, partly because he was so wound up, and partly because the writing on the following page was suddenly very faint. Perhaps Jessica Charlotte had left the notebook open in the sun, because the ink had faded almost completely. He managed to decipher a few words: alone, wandering, despair, river, coward, never, and then again alone. He turned the page cautiously, as if afraid of what he would find there, and he gasped with surprise. The writing was strong again, stronger and clearer than it had ever been, but it was quite different. It was written with a different pen, one with a thicker nib, and blue ink instead of brown. It was surely a man's handwriting, sharp, hard, and full of jutting points and steeply sloping lines. Omri felt almost sick. Someone else had taken over the writing. Had she died, Jessica Charlotte, just at that point? Was he never going to find out now the secret of the cupboard? And that is the end of Chapter 8.